dreams are remarkable because, a lot of times you have a dream and you think, there's no way my conscious mind could ever have thought that up.
Mm.
There's no way your conscious mind would have ever come up with certain images in a million years.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is that when you work with dreams, and sometimes dreams really unfold and you see all these layers of meaning, and the way the meanings interact and intersect and move together, you couldn't imagine a finer kind of symbolic craft, even by the best novelist or filmmaker. It's like, wow, it's so subtle and it's so profound and it's so wise.
Hi, I'm Ricky Duriz. Welcome to episode 58 of the Mind That Ego podcast. I'm joined by Lisa Marchiano, an award-winning author and certified Jungian analyst with a private practice in Philadelphia. Lisa is the author of Motherhood, Facing and Finding Yourself, and The Vital Spark, Reclaim Your Outlaw Energies and Find Your Feminine Fire. Her latest book, Dreamwise, Unlocking the Meaning of Your Dreams, is written with Deborah Stewart and Joseph Lee, her fellow co-hosts of the popular depth psychology podcast, This Jungian Life. Our conversation focuses on making sense of dreams. Topics include understanding imagery and symbols, unlocking meaning, working with setting, characters and unfolding storylines, the dream ego's perspective, dreaming on through active imagination, learning from emotions, encounters with the self and the God within, dreams as life-changing religious experiences, and practical tips for dream recall. We join the conversation with Lisa and I discussing the application of the keys identified in Dreamwise. I dream a lot.
Oh, that's great.
I have a lot of dreams. If I try and apply all these keys to every dream, it's a full-time job. So I'm trying to discern, and I'm looking back at old dreams with different insights that have come from it.
Mm-hmm.
But it also reinforces a lot of the framework, the Jungian framework as well. The way that it's embedded in the dream interpretation has helped kind of reinforce my understanding in different areas
Good.
as well, which is good.
Yeah, you're definitely not meant to apply every key to every dream. It's more like there's a couple that are probably good for almost every dream, like personal associations. But otherwise, if you just what I like to do is just pick a key at random and just try it.
Mm-hmm.
And then just kind of play around. And I usually find that, I don't know, 5 keys in, I'm like, oh, I didn't think about it that way at first,
Yeah. Almost like allowing synchronicity.
Yes,
Around
exactly.
the keys.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I did notice that reading through. There was actually a von Franz quote around the aha moment. And she says, I'm going to paraphrase it, but something like, every understood dream is like an electric shock into higher consciousness.
Yes.
I had a dream around electricity not so long ago. And I've been with this synchronicity of electricity and currents and
Oh, wow.
didn't quite understand it. And I saw that quote towards the end, which is a really nice little,
That's really cool.
It's cool.
That's very cool. Yeah. So, I was going to say, I was reading von Franz last week. I was reading a different book and she talked about, she used the phrase, there's always a hair in the soup, she was using that to talk about kind of like a psychological phenomenon.
Yeah.
And last night I dreamt I was eating something and there were just all of these hairs in it.
No way.
So I'm like, okay, I think that was a little conversation with Marie-Louise.
Yeah. Well, it was, yesterday was her death anniversary.
Oh, was it?
17th of February.
Wow.
And in the book as well, it mentions, so I'm getting goosebumps sharing this.
Yeah.
You mention, I had 2 separate synchronicities around it because someone shared it in a group I've not yet attended, a Berlin-based group.
Okay.
It was her death anniversary and spoke of her belief essentially in the afterlife.
Yeah.
And her relationship with Jung and this toy frog that he'd given her that represented resurrection. And then towards the end of the book, I think it's when you talk about Jung, it talks about one of Jung's dreams, like Bollingdon, the different building. And all of that, those 2 things happened on the on Franz's kind of death anniversary or transition
Wow. Oh, wow.
anniversary.
Yeah, we talk about his the other Bollingen dream that he told to Barbara Hannah and von Franz. He told it to them separately.
Yeah. I wonder if we could take a step back, maybe a few
Sure.
steps.
Yeah.
And maybe begin also with your, like, a broad definition of your understanding of what is a dream.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of going back to square one.
Yeah, well, I mean, the people who study neuroscience and the neuroscience of dreaming would probably speak about it differently. So I'm just going to speak to what I know. I mean, apparently all kinds of animals dream. They think spiders dream, so it seems pretty universal. And we spend a lot of our life in dreaming. And we know that if you deprive someone of REM sleep for a long time, there are really serious repercussions. I think that there's certainly big psychological repercussions. I think something like psychosis ensues, and there may also be physical health consequences as well. So it's really important. Like, if we're deprived of it, we don't do well. And there are all these theories, again, that the kind of neuroscientists have come up with about what's actually happening in the brain when it dreams. But from a depth psychological perspective, I see that the dream is a missive from the unconscious. And, this is, we certainly know that we have an unconscious. I mean, that is now uncontested as far as I'm concerned. And the way I look at it is the unconscious looks at us differently. Like, we move through our lives and consciously we're kind of calculating, I have to get this much done by lunch today. And then I've got to remember to take the chicken out to defrost it for dinner. And I'm preoccupied because I had this annoying conversation with my sister yesterday, or whatever it is. You've got your thoughts and you've got the way that you see yourself and the way that you see your life and the things happening around you and your relationships and politics and whatever else. But there's a different perspective that the unconscious has. The unconscious is, tracking different things, and it's paying attention to things that have lapsed from consciousness, maybe some things you don't want to think about. And so every night, it's like the dream maker. I mean, the dream maker is one of the big metaphors in the book, because it's like that part that's kind of watching all the time. And at night, it kind of taps you on your shoulder. And it's like, did you think about this? What about this? Did you look at it this way? So it usually provides either an addition to the conscious attitude or often a corrective to the conscious attitude. Like, hey, you got that wrong. You need to look at it like this.
So I know I'm fairly well versed as a layperson with Jungian frameworks in terms of symbolism, the almost poetic expression of the unconscious. I think a lot of listeners will be as well, just for people I've kind of accrued through my own interest. But for people who they dream and they're not so well versed, in terms of that tap on the shoulder, how do you begin to parse apart what can feel like it's not literal? So how do you look at that and say, oh, that could be the message? How do you begin to view it?
Well, that is the question, right? It's like, ooh, this is really great. I'm getting all this additional information. That's like, wait a minute, I can't make any sense of it. It doesn't make sense. And what I will say, and I think we write this in the book, is, I'm pretty good at this point at working with other people's dreams. I mean, I do it every single day. I do it multiple times a day. It doesn't mean that I always, sometimes I'm like, I really don't know. That happens plenty of times, or even after sitting with a dream, I can't really see it clearly. But a lot of times I can at least find something to say about it that the other person goes, oh, yeah, that's helpful. But my own dreams, I'm like, oh, wow, what could that possibly mean? This dream that I just woke up with of I've ordered some food and there's hair after hair in it. What does that mean? What is my unconscious trying to tell me? And it's much, much harder for me to work with my own dreams then. And I think that's true for most of us, right? Because because your dreams are showing you your unconscious, and it's a little bit like trying to see your own shadow. You keep on having to whip around and see what's behind you, and it's hard to catch a glimpse of it. So one of the things I really wanted to do with the book was provide tools that make it easier for people to understand their own dreams. And that's the purpose of the keys, really. So the keys in the book are these little prompts that take a single idea and kind of let you investigate the dream from a particular standpoint. And you might try it and it doesn't turn anything loose, so you just go on to the next one.
Mm-hmm.
So it 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 hopefully sort of leads you into the aha moment, rather than trying to really just apply your reasoning to it. Although, that can help sometimes. I mean, one of the places to start with a dream is to, give personal associations.
Mm-hmm.
So has this ever happened to you? And when has it happened to you? And what's that like when it happens to you? You can look at figures of speech. Does the image call up a figure of speech? Um, but if that doesn't sort of turn something loose, and it's often just a piece, you can keep on walking around it and wondering about it in different ways. One of the keys that I think is really important, such that you should probably at least try it with every dream, is this notion that the perspective of the dream ego is probably wrong, or maybe not wrong, but like the least trustworthy part of the least trustworthy attitude in the dream. So, for example, and I don't know what my little dream meant last night, but I'll just take a stab at it. I am the kind of person that if I order food, let's say at takeout food, and there's a single hair in it. In fact, I think this just happened to me the other day. I will take it out, pretend it didn't happen, and keep eating. And at least if it's something I'm enjoying, I don't want the hair to get in the way of me enjoying it. But in my dream last night, I don't know, it must have been 3 or 4 hairs.
Mm-hmm.
And my dream ego kept on taking them out and kept on eating. And so that little thing about, what about the attitude of the dream ego? Can I try on for size that it might be incorrect?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that it's incorrect. Like, that might be a good thing to do, but it's possible that the dream is saying, like, hey, maybe the first hair, it's okay to take it out and keep eating. But, like, maybe sometimes if there's like 5 or 6 hairs in your food, maybe you should stop eating, right?
Yeah.
So that's that. And that's interesting because as I mentioned before, I had just been reading this Franz passage where she talks about, a certain type of person, there's always a hair in the soup, right? That keeps them from enjoying things. And it's possible that my unconscious picked up on this image from Marie-Louise von Franz, and then is like, maybe one of my issues, and I think this might be true, is there might be a way sometimes where I try to pretend like I don't see that there might be something wrong in a situation. I just keep on sort of making the best of it to a fault. Where I overcommit maybe to situations that maybe it's best if I take a step back. So that's that's a little example of how I might take this kind of puzzling, interesting dream image of like hairs in the food, and then when I say, well, what if the attitude of the dream ego, the I in the dream, is wrong? Okay, that's interesting. That opens something up for me. So that's an example of kind of how to apply the keys.
I'm going to just share intuitively something that comes to mind as well. It may or may not be useful, but I remember during the Vipassana retreat, there are each day you have a different teaching from Goenka. Very non-dogmatic. He talks through the process, but he's a funny guy, and like he'll share anecdotes. And one of the anecdotes that came to mind when you were speaking was that I think he's talking of impermanence. So he's talking to impermanence and how everything changes. And he uses the example, I think he's talking of the physical body. And he says how we find certain things beautiful and certain things ugly. And we might, for example, look at your loved one and say, oh, what beautiful hair you have. The moment that hair falls out and it is in the soup, so to speak, it's like, oh, I don't like it. So at what point did that become not beautiful and something really, getting in the way? That just came to mind. I don't know if there's any relevance, but
right.
that's I think a good example as well of an association. Like, as you were speaking, something in my unconscious just presented that to me to share, which may have relevance for me. You mentioned the dream ego, and this fascinates me, the way that we enter the dream world, which is of the making of the dream maker. There's a wider environment to that dream, and yet we the vast majority of the time have a set perspective.
Yeah.
And as you say, that usually is represents a conscious attitude. So the difference that you speak to is where the unconscious is communicating. Could you maybe say a bit more around how the dream ego relates to its environment? And we could maybe begin with the actual environment and then certain dream characters as well.
Yeah, well, one of the interesting things is that you can think about the dream ego, at least some of the time, you can see the dream ego as an image of what the unconscious thinks of you. So that how the dream ego behaves in the dream is like a little kind of story about how you relate to parts of yourself. So let's say that there is, you're in the dream, and you're right. Most dreams, if you ask someone, "What did you dream last night?" they'll say, "Well, so I was eating takeout food." It often starts with an I. And let's say that there's a little kitten in the dream that the dream maker is supposed to be responsible for. And I'm sorry, that the dream ego is supposed to be responsible for. And the you in the dream has forgotten to feed the kitten. And now it's starving, and it's, got open sores on its body, and you find it, and you're bereft, and you're forlorn, that you're filled with remorse that you've not taken good care of this kitten. Well, it's an image that your conscious personality has been neglecting some tender part of you. So, to look at the dream ego and to notice how the dream ego is in the environment, what the dream ego is doing or not doing, what's acting on the dream ego, it's often a little picture of what the unconscious thinks about your conscious personality.
In terms of pictures as well, I just find it miraculous how the psyche just dreams up. The deeper you go into exploring dreams, the way, the intricacy, that alone for me was a huge part of my awakening. I had a lucid dream. Actually, there were a few inspirations, because these images were inspired by a leaf that I looked at in this lucid dream. And another nice synchronicity. So I had this tattoo of a leaf. And you mentioned in the book about rituals to acknowledge it. And that was one for me.
Yes.
But the level of detail that is possible in the dreamscape is phenomenal. And not only that, the ability to inquire and go further into the environment, the dynamics, which is something I know you speak to in the book as well, like the movements, the scenes. Maybe that's a nice segue into, I think is one of the keys, is looking at a dream almost like a movie or an artwork. Could you maybe speak to that and how that relates to the dream world?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just want to say, dreams are remarkable because, a lot of times you have a dream and you think, there's no way my conscious mind could ever have thought that up. There's no way your conscious mind would have ever come up with certain images in a million years. The other thing is that when you work with dreams, and sometimes dreams really unfold, and you see all these layers of meaning, and the way the meanings interact and intersect and move together. You couldn't imagine a finer kind of symbolic craft, even by the best novelist or filmmaker. It's like, wow, it's so subtle and it's so profound and it's so wise. So yeah, you're talking about what Jung called the dramatic structure of the dream, and that is one of the chapters. So we have, each chapter is sort of a different a different lens that you can use to look at dreams. And Jung pointed out that you can see dreams as a kind of like a drama, and there are kind of typical parts of a dream. Now, not every dream has these parts, but many do. So there's the setting. The curtain comes up, and you're somewhere. I'm in a library, and there you are. Okay. And then there's sort of the exposition. Who are the characters? Who's there with you? It's you, it's your partner, it's, some unknown person. And then there's kind of some development. Something happens. There's some action and maybe a sense of rising tension. And then there's often some kind of climax or catastrophe, which is sort of the high point of the tension. And then there's the resolution. Or not. Some dreams, a lot of dreams will have the first features and then there's no resolution. And it's sort of like the psyche at that point. It's like the psyche saying, we're right in the middle of something and I don't know where this is going to go, you know?
Yeah.
And it's helpful to look at dreams like a drama, because sometimes we get so caught up with a single image. Like, for example, the hair in the soup, and you could think about it all these different ways, and you don't think, well, wait a minute, what did I do or not do with the hair in the soup? What happened before? What happened next? And it just helps you kind of follow the arc and see where the dream is going.
Yeah. And I know, because you mentioned active imagination in the book as well, like dreaming on the dream.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the practices as exactly what you mentioned, like imagining what came before or what comes after. I guess we're jumping a bit further ahead, but I'm just going to follow the flow of it in terms of how do I phrase this as a question? In terms of active imagination and the dream world, how do you see that relationship with waking imagination? So you have a dream, like you're completely, you're asleep. There's no real conscious control. But then with active imagination, there's a conscious input to imagine. How do you view that, and what are the benefits of almost re-entering, putting a toe into the water of the dream to explore it further?
Well, the idea of active imagination is that you bring consciousness, but you let yourself sink into a slightly like a relaxed state, right? So you're inviting the unconscious to come forward. So ideally, consciousness is there, and you can think and write and do all the things that you do, but you've really invited the unconscious in. And you do that by basically inviting imagery. So one of the techniques with active imagination that we talk about is that you pick an image from the dream. Like, for example, I might see my whatever it was last night that I was eating, dumplings or something with a hair in them, and then just kind of be with that image until it starts to move of its own accord, and then see what happens. So you're not directing the imagery, you're inviting the unconscious to present it, but you can interact with it. So if there's a person in the dream, you can talk with that person. So Jung felt that active imagination was a very, very important tool, and that it kind of speeded up psychological development, because in some sense, the point of Jung's work is to develop a working relationship between conscious and unconscious. And dreams help us do that, and active imagination really kind of supercharges it.
As a bridge from that thought as well, I know, again, a huge part of Jung's approach is like individuation or wholeness. And I know there can be a view often that dreams compensate, like you say, you have the conscious attitude and there's a compensation in the dream, or affirmation. There was a quote, I really like it in the book, around like the dream maker cheering you on. I really
Mm-hmm.
like that image of like the affirmation that you're on the right track as well.
Mm-hmm.
But this relationship of conscious and unconscious and becoming as a way of exploring more of our uniqueness, the hidden parts of the psyche, our spiritual potential even. Could you maybe speak a bit to the role, or the very purposeful knowledge in dreams? I know the book is Dream Wise, and the wisdom of that. How would you explain the knowledge in the dream world compared to maybe conventional knowledge that
Mm-hmm.
we think of?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I'm going to sort of contradict myself a little bit, I think, in my answer, but because Jung contradicted himself,
Mm.
and I think it's important to hold both of these. Jung said, it's not really that the unconscious. It would be a mistake to think that the unconscious is some kind of all-knowing guru, and all you have to do is get in touch with the unconscious, and it will have all the answers. Because actually, consciousness is very precious, and consciousness is what kind of does the hard work of mediating the inner world and the outer world. And there is a lot to be said for developing a strong ego consciousness that can deal with pressures from within and pressures from without. And so, in some sense, and Jung said at some point, it's not so much that the unconscious knows better; it's just that it knows more. I'm
Mm.
paraphrasing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that your ego attitude, it's not that what the ego knows is wrong, it's just incomplete, you know. And at the same time, the unconscious is the seat of Jung's transpersonal self, which he capitalized, so the self with the capital S. And at one point he said you might as well call it the God within.
Mm.
So the self really is this mysterious part of us that is in touch with something much greater, deeper, broader, larger than our ego consciousness could possibly imagine. And in some sense, every dream, we wind up saying toward the end of the book, and you can think about really who is the dream maker. The dream maker is the self, who
Mm-hmm.
gives you a little nightly nudge toward individuation. So it's the part of you that oversees your unfolding in the direction of the person that you were meant to become. And so, I think that the self is, it does reveal its wisdom in dreams. And sometimes that's just in these little tiny nudges that I just mentioned. And sometimes you have dreams that kind of knock your socks off.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you have, let me say it in a better way. Sometimes you have dreams that truly feel like a religious encounter.
Yeah.
And those dreams often come in times of transition or great turmoil. And they may actually be life-changing. Sometimes we have a dream like that and it clarifies a major life issue for us, or it results in us really taking a different path than we were because we've sort of had an encounter.
There's something in that, and I relate to that. I've had a number of really powerful dreams. And this dream of the leaf, that was essentially what happened. I became lucid, approached a tree or a bush and just looked at the leaf in detail. And that was enough. There was a lot of emotion in the dream, and maybe that's something we can talk to. But in that moment, I think I was 2021. I was experiencing
Wow.
psychosis,
Wow.
like an awakening psychosis turmoil, but was coming from a very materialistic view. And I would have been the first to say it's all neuroscientific, it's biological. Dreams are just like the brain processing the day's events. I would have easily said that. And this dream blew that away in its profound simplicity of just like, I could go into like the Fibonacci sequence of the intricate veins on this leaf, and it was also emanating some kind of energy as well. And it was so far removed from my experience of waking life. And yet I wrote about this years later, and it's still relevant now. And I did wonder at the time, does the unconscious always view reality like that? And we just have our window, and maybe there is this like numinous sense, there's always potential
Mm-hmm.
awakening sense. But point being, I can attest to that life changing
Mm-hmm.
power of dreams and like numinosity and the religious experience potentiality of dreams, which is clearly a very much an emotional issue as well. It's
Yeah.
not just imagery. Could you maybe speak to emotions in dreams, and maybe we could begin, if we kind of flip the duality and begin with difficult emotions, then move on to feelings of awe, but maybe begin
Mm-hmm.
with
Mm-hmm.
anxiety, fear, and those kind of
Yeah.
emotions.
Yeah. Yeah. I just want to respond to your experience, though, which sounds so important. And sometimes I think that if we have a too rationalistic view of life, it's like the container that we're trying to fit ourselves in is too small.
Mm,
And I think it can make us symptomatic. I've seen people with OCD, and I thought that was probably what was going on. And you had psychosis. It's like if you try to fit, I don't know, what is it? Is it the new wine in old skins or old wine? I can't remember. It doesn't work. We need a broader way to understand ourselves in the world. Some of us more than others. And what your dream did was provide this profound reorientation. You had an experience of the non-rational
mm,
that you could not explain away, that made you have to confront that and enlarge your experience, enlarge the way you thought about yourself in the world. And the dream did that.
mm-hmm,
Yeah.
mm-hmm.
So yeah, we have a chapter in the book on emotions, and it's probably the chapter that I'm most proud about because I think it's very important, emotions and dreams, and I've never seen anyone really write about it very much. So we'll mention, oh, feelings and dreams are really important, but I'd never seen anyone explain why or what
Mm,
they're doing, and
mm,
I really wanted to see if I could reverse engineer what I do when I work with the dream, because at this point, so much of it is intuitive. So when we were writing, I kept saying to Deb, I was like, okay, how would you explain tying, how would you explain in words, how would you tell someone to tie, how you tie your shoes, right? You'd have to be like, first you take the two strands and then you cross them over. And I was like, that's what I want to try to do with this, is because I know I cannot interpret a dream often without knowing what the feelings were.
mm,
I need to ask the dreamer, what were you feeling? What were you feeling then? But I don't know what my brain is doing when I do that. Like I can tell that it clarifies something for me, but like, why? What's going on? So it took a lot of,
mm.
it's hard to unpack something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Boy, the first few drafts of this chapter really just were pretty disastrous. But then, when I got it, I was so happy. So one of the things is we talk about aversive feelings like anger, disgust, and fear, and actually those are the most common emotions that we're likely to have in a dream. So if it's okay, maybe I'll read a little bit of this part of the
Of
book.
course. Yeah, feel free.
So because anger, there's a really great example. Okay. So, it's common for the dream ego to feel mad in dreams. Let's consider two dreams in which the dream ego felt angry. We'll start with a dream that Lisa had as a graduate student in her 20s. So, this was my dream. She'd just begun reading Jung and attending to her dreams. And this is a dream that I had. I think I was 28. And it's a dream that we call in the book cat talk. I've been keeping my cat Misty in a basement or garage, Joanna, the old woman from downstairs, had been looking in on her for a weekend while I was away. I didn't take her out of the basement right away once I got back, and Joanna kept looking in on her even after I told her I was back and didn't need her to do so anymore. Joanna started leaving me notes and nagging me to attend to something in the basement that would make it better for Misty. And then, even though I had already paid her for the weekend, she sent me a letter with an itemized invoice for $8,000. The tone of the letter was a bit angry. She explained that she had spent $12 on cat toys and that she had also taken Misty out for a nice lunch at a restaurant that had cost her $80. By far the largest item on the bill was something she called cat talk, her efforts to communicate with Misty. For this, she charged me $20,000. I was furious. So Lisa awakened with the same outrage the dream ego experienced. Only after working on the dream did Lisa realize it was depicting an inner situation. She had been shortchanging an important part of herself, leaving her beloved cat neglected and uncared for in the basement, so kind of a part of me. Joanna invokes the archetypal wise old woman, an aspect of the divine feminine often devalued in our culture and in Lisa's life at the time. In the dream, Joanna is closely connected with Lisa's cat. Cats are common symbols of instinctual feminine energy. Lisa's dreammaker was confronting her with the reality that she had undervalued those aspects of her life, which really makes sense because at the time I was getting a graduate degree and I was about to start law school, and I think I wasn't meant to be a lawyer. I think it's like, you've been keeping your cat in the basement for a really long time. The Dreammaker's anger portrayed how Lisa's conscious personality was relating to the unconscious, with defensiveness, disparagement, and entitlement. Lisa's anger in the dream showed her that in waking life, she was responding to the call to integrate soulfulness with rational irritation and avoidance. The dream provided an attitude correction by pointing out her devaluation of her inner feminine. So what the anger is doing in the dream is kind of showing, the dream maker is showing us the dream, the conscious attitude, right? And the anger of the dream ego is kind of brought up by the dream maker to say, look how you're responding to your inner life. And then there's another dream where the anger is actually important and kind of brings about healing. Can I keep going? Is that okay?
Yeah.
If I read the next dream? So this is a dream that one of our listeners sent in, one of our podcast listeners, and I just love it. It's called, well, we called it Crocodile in the Kids' Bedroom. There was a crocodile in our house. He was still and lay in our bedroom while the kids played around him. He made me very anxious. I was aware that we hadn't been feeding him, and I was worried that as time went on, he'd eat one of the kids. He had been with us for a week or a few days, the kids jumping around him and playing without a care. One day, he is in the room of our youngest girls, ages 6 and 4. Their room is clean and the lighting is dim and pinkish. The crocodile is facing their bed, and I see his mouth is open as he lies there. And this is the final straw. The girls are playing in the opposite corner. I get them out. I close the door and angrily and confidently confront my husband, saying, "This is ridiculous, and he needs to call someone to get rid of it." He reacts as though I'm being dramatic, and I say, "No, what is crazy is having a crocodile around babies." He nonchalantly relents, but says, "We'll have to split the cost to have it removed, about $200 from each of us." And I just want to point out, too, that both of us are kind of chuckling as we hear these dreams. Like, both of them are kind of funny. They're both sort of delightful, and like the dream maker is like, the dream maker's funny,
Yes,
like, this
there's
is
humor, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Both these dreams are sort of hilarious. So the dreamer is a 34-year-old woman who was homeschooling her 4 children. She reported unhealed trauma and found herself feeling depressed, overwhelmed, and angry. And this dream occurred at a time when she was negotiating with her husband to send the kids to school so she could study and pursue a career. In the beginning, the dreamer feels anxious and worried, but proceeds as if it is normal to have a crocodile hanging out with the kids. The dream ego takes takes note of the increasing signs of danger. The crocodile's mouth is open, and finally takes action. Feelings of fear intensify during the dream and turn to anger and protectiveness. The dream maker found a dramatic and funny way, to show the dreamer that her passive initial attitude was inappropriate. The crocodile represents an aspect of the dreamer's psyche that has gone hungry. She hasn't been feeding it. As a result, it poses a threat to her children. The dreamer has ignored the seriousness of the problem. Her anger about the crocodile and at her husband is entirely appropriate and spurs her to action in the dream and her life. Addressing this issue will mean confronting her husband, and she will have to take responsibility for her half. One way to discern whether the feeling of anger is appropriate and encouraged by the dream maker is to consider the dream's resolution. Lisa's dream ended with outrage and a sense of stalemate. Dream ego Lisa wasn't about to pay the exorbitant fees demanded, and Joanna is likewise not backing down. There is no good solution in sight. The crocodile dream, on the other hand, ends with a clear resolution. The problem posed by the dream, the hungry crocodile in the children's bedroom, is being decisively addressed, and the dream ego's anger helped to bring about a solution. So if you have a feeling like anger in the dream, and the same can be said of feeling, disgust and even fear, and you wonder, is the dream maker telling me that this is a sign that I'm defending against something or not being honest with myself? Or is the dream maker saying, hell yeah, you should be angry? Look at the resolution of the dream and see if you can figure it out from that. Did the anger help you get to a good resolution or not? Because if it did, it's probably the dream maker saying, yeah, you need that anger.
Yeah. Something, I don't want to tangent too much, but it brought to mind, in like the dream that you had, this wise woman figure.
Right.
Who often, so there's a dynamic, there's like the relation, how you're relating to the cat in the basement, the inner feminine. And then we have the dream ego's anger towards that. And then a character appears who mediates some kind of change in the relationship. At the risk, this isn't something for us to unpack now, but I had a dream the other night which didn't have a resolution, and it involved, I was in some kind of office space and I was walking through, and one of my high school, I'd say acquaintances, not a close friend, he was there, and he said to me, "Oh, are you free tonight? Are you able to meet?" And he mentioned another school friend's name, and this was a completely random name to be associated with. I think the first character was secondary school and the other was primary school, and I was just like, "Oh, I'm not so free. Like, how come?" And he said, "Oh, Connor needs support." And my stance in the dream was, I was intrigued, but I was aware I probably could have explored further. And it was almost as if the secondary school character, so the one that offered the invitation, was encouraging me to approach this hidden character who for me does represent, let's just say I know the bad boy kind of archetype's been in there, but very like, he was someone that I actually really got on with, but he got in a lot of trouble. And I always felt like I would meet a side of him that other people didn't see so much. He had a real reputation of being particularly, we call it hard, like growing up, like he was a bit of a hard man. But then I really got on with him and had a good relationship. So I was inquiring around, what kind of support does he need? And also, why is it and this happened whilst I was reading the book as well. So I started to think, this other character, why was he, like, he was giving me space. He knew that I might not be receptive. He wasn't pushing me. And the dream then went into a whole other thread, but that was more of a tangent than I planned.
No.
Just
I think it's
pointing to that.
really interesting. Yeah, yeah. So, and it would be interesting to know something about the secondary school character who's issuing the invitation. Because in some way, they both might represent part of a similar complex or the same complex, but one is just a little closer to consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And so almost a kind of intermediary,
Mm-hmm.
the one issuing the invitation. And so it would be interesting to kind of think about what are the dominant uh, um, associations that you have with that person. And, associations really should be pretty brief.
Mm.
You don't, they need to be, they need to have a little bit of an emotional hit,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't, you don't need to like remember every story about this kid, but like, what's the kind of essence you're
Yeah.
looking for, that, like that thing. It's like, oh yeah, he was like this.
Yeah.
And how is that serving as, I don't know, it's interesting because in a way he's kind of appearing in the role of a guide, right? He's
Mm-hmm.
he's he's sort of pointing where you need to look.
Yeah. I also, so what was interesting, I don't recollect any dreams around this guy.
Hmm.
I want to say full stop, apart from like last week or 2 weeks ago, another dream with him where I was in a bakery and it was really busy and I ordered a croissant and I paid for it. And I'll just say his name, Liam. He probably won't ever watch this, but Liam was behind the counter and it was towards the end, like the cafe was closing and he gave me the croissant and I was like, oh, cool. I paid for it. Looked in the bag and it was empty and he started walking off. And I was like, I'm going to get him. I'm going to get him. So I went to walk after him and I was like, actually, no, I'm going to leave it. But he actually appeared in that dream like a week before.
Wow.
So for whatever reason, I wonder, that's like a cheeky kind of misdemeanor, to like not give someone a croissant when they've asked for it, compared to the other things that this other guy, like what he was known for, was a lot worse. At
Hmm.
the same time, they're both acquaintances that I got on with, wasn't that close to, but would always be happy to see them.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
I don't want to take up too much more space with that that
No, but
dream,
I
but
mean,
the
I've got it.
sequence.
Yeah, no, I think you're bringing up a lot of stuff that's really interesting, right? And I think, because when we actually don't talk about this in the book, I was trying to put everything in the book, but
Yeah.
there was a word count. But dream series, the fact that
Hmm.
this person has appeared now twice in a couple of weeks, so there's certainly something there to be looked
Yeah.
at.
Yeah. I'll definitely use a few keys on that
Okay.
dream.
Yeah.
I want to look at in terms of emotionality, because you mentioned like the anger, and I know in the book you talk of disgust as well, and how often images that initially discuss us, yeah, that is right, can morph
Yeah.
into something
Yeah.
that's actually a lot more welcoming, like, and it shows that welcoming in those disgusting parts of the psyche can actually transform them.
Hmm.
um I don't know if there's anything else you want to say on that, or if we could shift into positive emotions.
Yeah, well, I'll just say really briefly that Jung said a bunch of different times throughout the collected works, the face we turn toward the unconscious is the face that looks back at us.
Mm,
So if we're afraid of it, it will look fearful. If we are disgusted by some aspect of ourselves, it will appear disgusting in dreams. But that's why when we start relating to it with curiosity, the images often become more positive. But to move into positive emotions, and there's a lot to say about it. But perhaps the most important one is to kind of pick up the thread we were talking about before, these powerful dreams of awe and what Jung called numinosity. That was the numinous was a term coined by Otto Rank, and uh, it means this feeling of sort of awe, and it's the feeling that goes along with the religious encounter, and
mm,
and so that sense of being just kind of bowled over, overwhelmed. It may be terrifying, but it's filled with awe, and it may move you to tears. It may be incredibly beautiful. I mean, there's different shades of it.
mm-hmm.
but you know you've been in the presence of something other. And that is often an experience in dreams in little ways, and sometimes in very, very big ways.
Yeah, I like the balance of that. I know you talked to the dark side of the self when it seems in those situations where you're not taking the warning signs from the unconscious. And I'm also sharing this to balance my kind of bias towards the numinous and like positive, which I love. But then, as you mentioned, they can be terrifying if it feels like the unconscious is really trying to get a message through.
Mm-hmm.
Self communicates in a way that shocks you into an awakening rather than kind of awes you into it through something beautiful. It can also be like,
Yeah,
wow, I've got to pay attention.
right.
Yeah. There's so much territory to explore. I'm conscious of the time. I'm wondering, because we've touched upon the self and the nature of dreams, and I get to this stage of the conversation. I respect your time. I don't want to run over too much, so I'll give you an option. You've got like a fork in the road.
Mm-hmm.
um, One would be going more into synchronicity and a lot of the discussion around, you know, the inner work of dreams and individuation and the relationship between that and the outer world, but then also how the self manifests in quote unquote the outer reality. That's one option to look at synchronicity.
Mm-hmm.
The other would be practical steps for people that are wanting to record their dreams more. You can respond to that in any way you see fit. Maybe,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, whatever
Well,
direction.
I do have a hard stop in 5
Okay,
minutes because I
okay.
have an appointment.
Mm-hmm.
So the first question is so fascinating, but probably not
Two.
really
That's a
doable in a
part
few
two. That's
minutes.
part two.
That's right. So, but I will say, probably the number one question that we get on the podcast is, how can I remember my dreams? Because not everyone remembers very many dreams. And there is a whole appendix in the back of the book that helps, offers everything we know
Mm-hmm.
about recalling dreams. And the first step really is to write them down, and get yourself a journal, get yourself a special pen. I have a little pen that has a little red light at the tip, so if I wake up before the lights are on, I can write it down. And try to write something down every morning. Make that the first thing you do to reach for your dream journal. Even if you just say, gosh, I feel really groggy this morning and I don't remember any dreams. But if you get in the habit that the first thing you do is you roll over and you start writing,
Mm-hmm.
that will often really prime the pump. And you should write down, even if you just remember something, a little image, write it down, because as you move toward the dreams, they will come forward to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was something I love in the book, the emphasis on it being a relationship. And it's almost as if you start to acknowledge the dream maker, it's like it can see, or it can acknowledge the acknowledgement and increase the likelihood of receiving the messages of dreams.
And it becomes a conversation, just like your dream, just like
Mm.
your dream maker has introduced a new kind of hieroglyphic into
Mm.
its vocabulary with Liam.
Mhm. Yeah.
And you you don't know what that
I
is
don't
yet.
know. No. I'll have to update you if I find out.
But
Lisa, sorry, go on.
no, that's fine.
No, I was gonna say I wanted to thank you so much for taking the time. I've been listening to this Jungian Life for a number of years, and it's probably the first time I've spoken to someone where I'm almost like have that not, I wouldn't say starstruck, but I've listened to your voice so much in
Mhm.
audio form, and it's really nice to get to talk to you and converse with you. And I love the book.
Oh,
I mentioned
thank
it
you so
earlier.
much.
I see it really as not only a great journey into the unconscious and into understanding the dream maker, but also just a great reference to go back to. So thank you so much for taking the time today, and thanks for all the work that you're doing.
Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Mind That Ego podcast. To stay up to date, you can join the Mind That Ego mailing list if you head to mindthatego.com/MFM. You'll also get a copy of my book, Mindsets for Mindfulness, when you join. You can also follow Mind That Ego on Facebook and YouTube, where the podcasts are also displayed in video format along with other inspired videos that I create. Or if Instagram is more your social media of choice, you can follow me at Ricky_Deriz. That's DERISZ.